Good live time. Good morning. I'm here late on a Sunday morning. What did I do Friday? Oh, yeah. It was busy Friday. Busy Friday, busy yesterday. I've come to you today with jet ski here because it's, well, I was going to say it's almost summer, but it's any time of year in the Gold Coast is good for a jet ski. I've been out in the water, come back, and then I'm trying to figure out what to do in this video today. There's something that, there's a problem I want to solve, and I'm going to explain the whole thing in just a moment and hope that people have suggestions and ideas. Let's start with the easy bit, relatively speaking, being muting my device so it doesn't bug me, and then sponsorship with 1Password. 1Password, extended access management, secure every sign-in for every app on every device. Now, I think I mentioned a while ago, I will be heading over, in fact, I'm heading over to the US 8 days from now. So I've got one more of these videos before I go. Over to the US, over to Canada, over to the President's Cup in Montreal, spending time with 1Password, having a chat to all of the folks that they have invited along to the event, which would be really cool. Looking forward to talking to people about securing every sign-in for every app on every device. That was a smooth segue, wasn't it? Modern security and IT teams need to make sure every identity, device, and application is secure. Only 1Password Extended Access Management, or XAM, which I'm assuming is XAM. I will confirm that when I'm over in Montreal. Checks every box. Go and request a demo. So big thanks to 1Password for being surely my longest, most prevalent sponsor. By the time you roll Collide into that, which of course is what has brought Extended Access Management into the 1Password fold. Jono's here. Good morning. James, hello. Wayne, morning. Stefan's here. G'day, Stefan. I was meant to do something for you, wasn't I? Take your PRs. Write my documents. I've been busy. It's always my excuse, isn't it? I know. So here's what I had in mind for today. And I had actually mentioned a little bit of this to Stefan the other day. I put it in our internal Slack. And the description that I put in today's video is making sense of the noise, tracking, indexing, and cataloging data breaches. Now, I've had this idea in mind in one way or another for at least 6 years. And it's very much around the fact that we really don't have a canonical resource that indexes data breaches. Now, have I been pwned is not that. Have I been pwned is sort of the tip of the iceberg of data breaches that go into the system and that's it. And then your email addresses are searchable, and it's only breaches that have got email addresses, other than that one time I put Facebook phone numbers in there, and I think I'm still regretting that for other reasons. But, let's say, for example, someone says, what's a recent data breach? So say the Transport London one. They go, what was the story with Transport London? So, well, there's a gazillion different news articles. I don't think we really know what data classes were impacted. Was it just email addresses? It sounds like only 5,000 people. There's no sort of central place you can go and go, look, what was just the empirical facts about the incident? Now, in some ways, that's almost not the best example. It's recent, it's kind of well known, but it's all the lower tier stuff. A good example of this, and I won't name the company at the moment, but I just had a call with the company, with the company's lawyer, about their data breach. And if I go and search without naming the company, so if I search for their name followed by data breach, what do I find? Well, first of all, I've got to put that in quotes so it includes that word. All right, so I find something here on Hack Notice, the full database of the company. I find something a bit further down on a popular hacking forum. I find a tweet about it. I find nothing in terms of their disclosure notice, because they haven't done one. I find nothing about press or other reading material. And then if I do go to, say, the popular hacking forum that indexes it, let's do that, rather, that has listed it. Got to log in, and I don't know if some of you know what I'm talking about, the whole website, but I do refrain from naming, so we don't redistribute anymore. Select each bird that is pictured alone in the image, which I have to Serious? So, we've got a normal sort of anti-automation thing here with 9 pictures. Some of them have multiple birds. Some of them have cats. One of them has one bird in the picture. Verify. Okay, and now it wants a username and a password. I reach over here to my fingerprint reader so we can one password our way into it. One password extended access manager, which is not this, but it's a different thing. But okay, now can we see the details of the incident? Let's have a look. So it comes up and says there's a date, there's a website, the total number of records. Now, see, the total number of records is not really accurate in terms of total number of individuals. And then when it goes through and it talks about the compromised data, some of this is also not really, without going into detail, there's an example here, it says password. It's not really actual passwords that are impacted by this. Now, the other thing is that when I'm going through jet skiing, living life, being very busy, and I'm getting this constant flood of data breaches, they're just going into my inbox. And as I start processing them, I do keep a record of how I do verification, disclosure, and everything, just in case I need to get back to that. But I don't track everything in there. And also, there's nothing that's really publicly facing. Now, I'll come back to the publicly facing bit in a moment because I want to read some comments from it. But what I really would like is, at the very least, as stuff starts appearing in the public domain, so it starts appearing especially on social media platforms. There's several Twitter accounts in particular, such as Dark Web Informer, that are great at trawling through, finding exposed data breaches, and then putting a little tweet about it. I'd love to have a canonical resource that indexes all of that so that when someone sends me something and I'll go, I thought I heard something about that the other day. Did I get an email? Was it a DM? Was it on Keybase? Was it on Signal or Telegram? Carrier Pigeon, like whatever it was. How did it come to me? Have I heard about this before? Comments. Wayne says, like a security breach wiki. Like Wikipedia, but for security breach. That's actually a good way of putting it, like Wikipedia. Jono says a sanitize as much as possible catalog. Now, sanitization, good term here. So let's look at it in 2 different dimensions. So there's the dimension of what would go into this index and be publicly facing. Let's take that Transport for London thing. Transport for London, fine. You would have an entry, Transport for London. This is the name of the incident. Any other relevant data attribute about a link to the website, a link to the disclosure notice if it exists, the number of individuals impacted by it. Not always an easy number either. Number of individuals. Number of unique email addresses is a bit easier, but even that can be greater than the number of people that had accounts, because what if people are putting other people's email addresses in places? So, for example, I was in the Covevi, I don't know, one of these data breaches where people using the service would upload all the contacts to it. So one person would then expose a whole heap of other people's data. But that's the sort of thing that can be described in, to use Wayne's term, a wiki. So there's this dimension of what would go in there. Some things that couldn't go in there and be publicly facing is, what about data breaches that, let's say someone has breached a system and then they've reached out and said, hey, Troy, here's all the data. And first of all, I've got to go, stop doing that. Don't do that again. But second of all, I've got to do disclosure and everything. I wouldn't want to have some immediately publicly facing record go out there before I get the opportunity to talk to organizations. So I think the most value for this is for the things that are out there in quasi-public domain. And by that I mean tweeted by various accounts, possibly posted to public websites. So there's the dimension of what should go out there publicly in terms of incidents. Then there's the other dimension, which is for an incident, which is publicly searchable. Are there other attributes which should not be publicly searchable? So, for example, a link through to where the data has been published. That's not something that I want to make available to other people. Possibly how the verification works. So in my own internal system, if I verify a data breach by, say, testing some mailinator email addresses, I will keep a record of that. so that later on, if someone comes along and says, screw you, man, like we never had a data breach, I'll go, well, I tested these individual email addresses and they all came back and said you did. So there are probably other attributes there as well, particularly things that could lead to the further exposure or redistribution of data. That's not something I'd want publicly there. Then there's a question as well about how you seed and populate this thing. I am but one person, and I have Stefan now, which is awesome, and that helps a lot with the code. But as we've just established there, I still can't keep up with the bare necessities of what I need to do now. I'd really like some sort of a model where other people can contribute. Now that brings with it a whole world of different problems, but I'd love people to go, every time when I get an email or something like this, and someone's like, hey, Troy, have you seen the thing? I'd be like, hey, it'd be great if you could actually add it to this index. Now, that is something which would absolutely require moderation for really obvious reasons. But there are so many people out there that come across these data breaches. It would just be fantastic to have that captured somewhere where someone has an interface they can put that in. And I imagine there's got to be some sort of triage process. You put this in. Myself or some other trusted close party could look at it and go, yep, that's reasonable, that's accurate, that's not announcing or disclosing something that isn't already captured somewhere in the public domain. I think that would be really helpful. And James is saying like Wikipedia too. Now you're laughing there, so I'm not sure if you're like laughing at the accuracy of that, or you're commenting on Wayne's comment. Wayne says, published once verified. You could also have it listed in pending badge so people know you're aware of it. Now, here's the problem with published but verified. So let's just take a look. Let's go to twitter.com which just defaults to x.com /dark web informer. And I'll drop this in the chat in case anyone wants to have a little look. And there are several different accounts like this that are very similar. What have we got here? All right, first one. Oh no, that one's hard to pronounce. I'll do it anyway. First one here from 2 minutes ago. 07 Group is allegedly selling the database of Kale Suvanmia. That's hard to pronounce. Let's pick something else. See if there's something that we actually know. Now, some of the stuff in here is not directly related to data breaches. DDoS attack here. KSA targets anonymous UAE world universities. Lots of leaks here of small things in other parts of the world. Every part of the world is another part of the world, really, isn't it? Something in Brazil, a bunch of DDoS attack stuff. Oh, a lot of DDoS stuff here. Okay, let's do this one. If I go down to 6 hours ago, a threat actor has allegedly leaked Dutch contact center leads. Now, is that the name of the place? Dutch contact center leads, 300,000. Dutch lead generation database. That sounds like a spam list, doesn't it? All right, screw that. We'll go down to another one. What else is in here? I feel like I tweeted one the other day. People selling source code. Let's do this one. What could go wrong with this one? The Royal Thai Police Database. A threat actor is allegedly selling the Royal Thai Police Database. Now, there's a lot of there's one allegedly in there, but it's obviously a very, very important caveat here. Allegedly selling the Royal Thai Police Database. So if we have a look at the image that's in here, this is a screen cap from a popular hacking forum. Total 123,000 lines, price $1,000, contact. There's a sample in there that's been obfuscated for obvious reasons, which is also partly the reason why I wouldn't want to publicly link through to where this stuff has been published, because it does have a bunch of PII, even just in samples for things that are being sold. But in this case, I just find a lot of these, they appear and then they disappear. And what I mean by disappear is that they just sort of sink into the histories of breach archives and we hear nothing more about it. We don't see any press about it. We don't see any statement. I can imagine, particularly in a part of the world like Thailand, based on my experience, we're probably a lot less likely to see a full and frank disclosure for an incident like this. Now, maybe it's not even accurate, I don't know, but to the point that I think was it Wayne made before, there is a constant flood of these things, and verification is a time-consuming process. So when something like this pops up, it is alleged, it is sitting there on the public domain, it is not verified, it may not be accurate. And that in itself is of value too. You know, stuff that only goes in a have I been pwned once I'm pretty confident it's legitimate. But let's say it's this Thai police thing, and then 6 months from now, someone pops up and they're like, hey, here's the Thai police database. Like, wasn't there a thing about that? Oh yeah, I can find it now because there was an index of it and I can go back to it. Also, what if it is fake? So what if Thai police do come out and they make some statements and they explain that, well, this is actually our publicly facing phone directory. You know, so all right, not fake, but of no consequence. Well, that would be good to know. And in fact, part of the discussion I had just before doing this video with the lawyer for an organisation was having a public statement about what actually happened is important. It could be a very benign incident, and you might think that it's so benign it doesn't even warrant disclosure. So put out a statement and explain this. People out here are saying we're hacked, and there's no doubt in this case that they were, but it is quite benign, and here are the reasons it's quite benign. I would like to cut through the FUD and get to the point of what has actually happened on these incidents and whether or not they're noteworthy. Some of them aren't. Milford, good morning. How do I turn the narrator crap off? It's like a background talking track, constantly annoying me. No idea. What's the narrator track? No. Jonah says, I imagine there would be different sections of the site, one for submitting an internal for verification and additional non-public details, and the public details real. Well, and you make a good point here, Jono, which is, does this become the pipeline that I then use to figure out which of these incidents need to be processed and going to have I been pwned? And there's a part of me that feels, for the greater good of the community and the world, that shouldn't be the case. There's a part of me that feels that there should just be a canonical public source that we can use that isn't then something that is designed to feed have I been pwned. I think having it there as an independent resource, and then I may refer to that when I then go through and process data, granted. I think having it a little bit more independent is probably important. But would I then have a situation where people send me data and it's like, well, that's not already in our index, in our list here, I'm going to go and add it in? That would be great. So what do we talk? Oh, we're still on the narration here. What is this narration talking about? James says on Android, Milford, on everything. But coming to think that my TV runs Android too. Well, a lot of things run Android now. Audio narration is an accessibility feature for the blind. Yeah. Wayne says, thinking along the lines of GitHub issues and tags for tracking. Well, you see, then there's the next obvious question, which is if we're going to do this, like what is the platform to do it on? Now, when Wayne started mentioning Wikipedia earlier on, it's like, it is very much a wiki, isn't it? It's very much like a structured data wiki, which is kind of what a wiki is, if you think about the way Wikipedia works. But what platform would we put it on? And also not wanting to just make too much hard work for myself here either. Michael's here. Good morning, Michael. James says, I like the idea of Git style over Wikipedia style. I think if you start looking at, like, I almost feel part of it is what is the data model that we're talking about here? So what does it look like? You know, well, there is maybe a breach isn't even the right word. There is an incident, and it is allegedly from a company name. The company has a URL. There's a description of the incident. There is some. It's all just starting to sound very like have I been pwned now, isn't it? There's like metadata of what data classes are actually impacted. Bit of support for Git here. Rack says, come down to establishing a community that can be trusted with creating and moderating the content. Now, it's very true too. And when you consider the community that comes across this sort of information, it is varied. And it's from the worst to the best ends of society. It is from the people that are executing data breaches and then holding people to ransom before dumping their medical data, through to the law enforcement officers that are trying to stop the first parties from doing the things that they're doing. It's a really broad range of people. And then, of course, within that range, we've got all of the professional InfoSec people, all of the dabblers, the people who accidentally find things, the techies who notice that there's an open database somewhere, like everything. And then within that spectrum, there's a lot of people that like to work anonymously. For both good reasons and bad reasons. There's also people who would like, for example, to have the kudos of repeated submissions and having some sort of recognition or badge or something like that, to be able to build up this reputation for themselves as a data breach finding person. So I think this bit about community and trust is interesting. And I just feel like the more I talk about this, the bigger and bigger it gets. Because we're then saying, well, if you had a community of people, how do you establish trust? Well, a lot of that trust is established via history. Even think about if you've ever had a look at a dark web website, how do you, metaphorically, how do you choose which dark web operator to buy your drugs from? Well, you look at reputation, because they've got a history and a ratings and everything else. And that's something that gets established over time. Trevor says, how much of your role, whether within Microsoft or within your independent ventures, can you rely on your knowledge of risk management principles? Well, first of all, I don't work for Microsoft. I'm a Microsoft regional director. I don't have a region. I don't direct anything. And I definitely don't get paid anything. So I am entirely independent, and I get a title that sounds fancy and is very misleading. And then I'm not really sure what your question is. How much do you rely on the knowledge of risk management principles? Jonas says, not sure Wikipedia or GitHub would help automate the pipeline. And then even thinking about pipeline and automation, are we overthinking it? Is it more about just having a canonical index of things? And then we add a few other attributes to it. And then the triage is basically, look, there's a flag that something has been added. Someone needs the rights to approve that. And then also, just think about the consumption side of this as well. Like, how do you make that available to other people? I would like to see the ability to have everything from a Twitter, or whatever we call it now, account through to an RSS feed, something that people can monitor as it ticks over. Conscious also that if I go and do this, and I now have a resource which is announcing alleged data breaches of different places, what would then be the consequences of an organization who is not yet aware of the data breach? However, it is there on a popular hacking forum, on a Twitter account, and being circulated. What would happen then? Interesting. But then again, it's a little bit like if I retweet one of these things. What would happen then? Newsy, so spend some time thinking of a name you won't regret in 10 years. Now, to be fair, I don't regret the name Have I Been Pwned. I joke about choosing a stupid name because I didn't think it would be serious. But evidently that name has really stuck. So I'm happy with that. I'm happy with that. I do still feel, and in my initial thoughts, I won't say the initial name I thought of around this or how to structure it, but from my very initial thoughts about 6 years ago thinking about this, I did want it to be something that was positioned as independent and separate to Have I Been Pwned. Sam says, was the Airtel breach from India ever confirmed? Oh, okay, perfect example. I would love to have a wiki somewhere. Now, see, a wiki is a good example too if you could have people contribute. I'd love to have a wiki somewhere that explained what happened with Airtel, because all I remember is a lot of allegedly. And I'm also really conscious that for reasons that I think are probably deep-seated cultural, it just feels like in India in particular, people are very good at saying, no breach, no breach, no. But here's all the data. No breach, but it's from your system. No breach. Okay, whatever. Whatever. So I don't know, Sam, but if only we had a system to be able to track that. All I know is it's not in Have I Been Pwned. So either I haven't seen the data, or I did and it wasn't verified, or something like that. James says, Git style lets people submit changes that must be approved, which is nice. Of course, the best of Wikipedia and Git could be combined to some degree. Neil, you mentioned making it a public resource, but who would be able to, here you go. Who would be able to access the private information? Just you or a community? Now, that is a good question. So let's say, as a good example, one of the private attributes would be the URL that the data has been published to. So very often, and in the case I was talking about before, when I had a call just before this, there's a tweet. The tweet is referring to a public hacking forum. So there's the URL of the tweet. That's one thing. So long as those tweets conformed to some basic minimum standards, i.e. didn't redistribute PII, okay, good to go. Happy to share that. The link to the public hacking forum, not happy to share that because that's the point at which it gets redistributed. But usually that hacking forum, once they link people through to the data, that is then on some sort of a file sharing service as well. So you end up with something that you're happy to share publicly and two other things that you're not. Who would have access to that? That is a good question. It's useful for me simply because I need to know where to get the data to then do the Have I Been Pwned thing. I think that there'd be a good discussion to have around, I'm thinking out loud here, would it be useful to other InfoSec companies trying to do things to protect customers, but I'm worried about the redistribution of data? Would it be useful to verified law enforcement agencies? So for argument's sake, let's say it was FBI. Would it be useful to them? I think it would be, but do we still want to redistribute data? Yeah, good question. Good question. You can see I haven't worked all this out yet, right? Jonas says, I think index is one thing. The internal catalog would need to store content. As you said, those sources can disappear. Milford Johnson, do people accuse you of being a bad actor pretending to be a good actor? If so, how do you deal with it? People accuse me of all sorts of things. I don't feel like I get that one a lot. And I think a lot of that is because I'm so transparent about everything that happens in the way this system runs, including sitting here talking about ideas that I really haven't thought through that much. If they do, to be honest, I don't think I've ever had anyone accuse me of either A, being responsible for the breach, B, redistributing breaches, because I've been very, very cautious never to do that. I'd say the closest people come to accuse me of a bad actor is they say, Have I Been Pwned could be used for bad purposes. And sometimes they have some valid points. You know, if you could look up an email address and have it been pwned and know which data breaches they're in, that gives you a pointer of where to go to get the other person's information. Of course, that's one side of the scale. And then on the other side of the scale, there's all of the really, really useful, good things that are done as a result of being publicly searchable. But I'd say that's the closest it comes to it. How I deal with it, so long as it's reasonable and polite, I usually reply reasonably and politely. When people get ranty and all over the top, mute is good. I haven't had that for a long time, actually. I haven't had anyone get really upset for a while. Maybe because so many people left Twitter. I went somewhere else to be angry. Michael says, Breach Bank, fueled by Medibank data. Oh, geez. So Medibank, for folks that are maybe in other parts of the world, is our largest private health insurer. And in, when was it, Michael? Probably about October 2022, they got ransomed, didn't pay the ransom, and the ransomware crew started just dumping their data. And they just started with the most damaging thing, which was a list of people that had abortions. And then they moved on to people who were in like drug rehabilitation or psychotherapy services, and they just kept dumping data, which was terrible. And certainly for various reasons, none of that ever went into Have I Been Pwned. But that was one of three really major incidents we had in Australia within the space of a few months, which did change the political landscape here around data breaches. James says, then law enforcement mines the leaked data. Yeah, now that's, and this is why I have the hesitation. So this is in response to saying, well, who would you share this information to? That's kind of my, here's where I'm struggling with this. When we say law enforcement and we say, let's pick an example closer to home, the Australian Federal Police, which is like our FBI. I've spent a bunch of time with them doing talks. I have some nice challenge coins from the AFP up there somewhere. Hi, guys. And I have absolutely no doubt that their role there is to help protect us as Aussies, as the FBI is there to help protect Americans. And every country's got some sort of equivalent of that. And of course, then it raises the question, well, all right, well, does every country get access to this data as well? Which should be a question. There are often controls within those organizations that might limit what data that they can access as well. And further, I suspect there's a lot of information there which is frankly just of no interest to them. The one I was talking about earlier today, it's very benign. There will be no interest to a law enforcement agency. Which, of course, then means, well, why bother even having a link to it? And I'm honestly not sure that it is a good idea to do that. And it is something that, by principle, I don't like the idea of. I'm just wondering. This isn't my fault. It was James or Wayne was like, who else would you give a link to? I almost wonder if we're sort of reaching the conclusion that the only party that URL is actually useful for is the party that needs to process the data. And again, if we look at this as a more independent service, whether it's something that I use for Have I Been Pwned or other organizations doing similar things, and maybe it doesn't need to go into an index like this. You know, someone sends me an email and it's like, here's the Acme Core data breach and here's a link to the data. And I go, okay, well, I can see Acme Core is being discussed over there. Let's have an entry for Acme Core, and then the link to the data just never goes into it because there's no reason to. And Wayne says paid access. Bad actors don't want to pay like your API. That does feel very close to selling data breaches though, doesn't it? So you pay for access and to be honest, I would very much like, we keep coming back to the Wikipedia thing. The Wikipedia thing where it is a public resource. Now maybe you can donate to it if you want to, but for the most part it is just public and freely accessible. Keep in mind the original reason there was a cost put on the API is to weed out those bad actors, because we wanted to make sure that anyone querying email addresses and getting results back had some sense that it could be tied back to them. That's not the problem here. And what we're trying to do here is probably more comparable to pwned passwords, which is I want everyone to consume that as much as they possibly can. I want to remove every single barrier, not just a financial barrier, but even a barrier to sign up and create an account or anything like that. So I think it's actually more in that context, mate, where we just want to be like, make it as open and available to everyone as possible. Max says, what happens if the site gets hacked? The private data, links to the data which could be leaked. Yeah, and this is, I think what you're all doing is making really, really good points of why it would be a bad idea to have links to the data. It does simplify a lot of stuff if you just go, well, it's just a public resource. You know, there's nothing on here. There's no point hacking the website. What are you going to get? Stuff that's available publicly anyway. It's a good point. And I can keep things like links to the data, if they're relevant to, say, processing for Have I Been Pwned, keep them completely separate on our own internal systems. James says, if you support law enforcement, you have to decide what law enforcement agencies you support. Yes, which is kind of what we've already done in a way too, insofar as, let me pull the post up here. Troy Hunt, setting the bar. So when we started onboarding governments to have access to their own domains, to be able to search their government departments, linking through to the blog post I'm talking about here. When we started doing this, it seemed like a good idea. It seemed like an easy thing at the beginning. And then somewhere along the way, so I posted this in March 2022, somewhere, I have a feeling it was late 2021, someone approached me from a government which didn't feel good. And when I say didn't feel good, their request was the same as the other governments that have been on there. We've got, I think, 36 governments on there now. But it was just a part of the world that in my brain, I'm like, isn't that the place where things like freedom isn't a big thing, and democracy isn't really big, and your right to choose your sexuality or identity or whatever else it is isn't really respected? It just feels like that kind of place. And it was something that was very hard to put my finger on. So I ended up writing this blog post, setting the bar for government access to have been pwned. And I was trying to find a way of empirically measuring, I guess, the trustworthiness of a government. This is way beyond my pay grade, by the way. The trustworthiness of a government, so that I could have something to fall back on when someone approached me and said, let's just pick an easy one, okay? Now, it wasn't North Korea, but let's say, because if we go down the list, right down the bottom of this list, North Korea, if Kim, whoever, it'll be a Kim because it's Korea, Kim someone comes and says, we would like access to the data, and I'd be like, no. Oh, that'd be really awkward, wouldn't it? I want to be able to go, look, I didn't write this because of you guys, but I've written this thing which helps establish where the bar is in terms of governments that we will support and governments that we won't support. And you're at the bottom of the list, mate, so no. So my point is that I have given thought in the past to access that I will give to government. Now, to be clear as well, every government, including DPRK, if they really want to do this, can go and verify control of a domain that they own and then do a search. We're only talking about taking away the verification process to make it easier for governments that have loads and loads of domains, loads of .co.uk's or .gov.uk's or .gov.au's or similar. So we have a model for that, but to your point, James, you do then have to decide who you do and don't give access to. And if we don't store links to data, then we don't have the problem, do we? I feel like we've decided that. Michael says, I missed the start. Is this service supposed to actually collect breach data or just maintain information about the breaches? It's just descriptions of breaches. So it is just to be... Yeah, I gave examples of a few others. Someone mentioned Airtel in India before. Airtel is alleged to have had a data breach. Now, that is an immutable fact. They are alleged to have had a data breach. We don't know I don't know what ended up happening to that. Did they? I'd love to be able to go to the data breach index or whatever we call it. And you go there and it's like Airtel, date, description, links to media. What was the conclusion? No evidence found a breach, or never circulated or company denied it or whatever. But even if it did happen and it was legitimate and the data was out there, Ashley Madison style, no, the data would not be in this service. John says, I agree, not shared, and only the people accessing get full access. A sanitized or other kind of view for public consumption. Well, I think what we're getting to here is that at least as a baseline, and what I mean by baseline is a minimum viable product. And then in the future, way down the line, maybe you decide there's other ways you should do things. You could have more stuff. But I think just making it all public with the only control being around who can actually contribute or verify or make things live. There has to be a triage process. James says, instead of links, maybe categories should be maintained. Public torrent, file server, FTP. Well, the only thing with that is that very often the same data appears in many different places. So if it's Ashley Madison, what do you say? Torrent, yes. File server, yes. FTP, yes. Thumb drives all over the place, yes. Wayne says, log the breach. Don't link to the data. Seems to be the way forward. Yep. That's what we're getting to. James says, the phone companies got so bogged down they created self-serve portals. That didn't go well. What I use for one of our major telcos here in Australia is a nightmare. James says, I was thinking UAE, and then it's under the love hearts. It's hard to read. Something about stuff with data I'm not comfortable with. I mean, a really good example of this, and we've already talked ourselves out of this because there's not a good reason to do it, but, let's say that there was an Aussie data breach, and that had a whole bunch of info on people like me, and then there's a link to it, and then there is a law enforcement agency let's just keep using DPRK because it's not going to happen with them. And they're the ones that everyone's clearly like, no, we don't like those guys. And then, they had the link. That's not something that we want to see happening. They probably have other ways of getting it, but it wouldn't be through this service. Okay, so I think what we've got to is that this is a very wiki style thing. There needs to be community contributions. There needs to be some sort of a triage. Keeping anything that wouldn't be suitable for public view out of there would be a really good idea. So then you've really just got something that is submitted at some time, it gets approved and it's visible. And of course, to the point of the wiki, it is something that evolves over time. Because if we put in, the Airtel thing, over the course of time, we learn more about it. And that's something that maybe should be updated. Milford says, on a non-related party, did you go to a good party late last night, mate? It's because it looked like shit, isn't it? No, because you came in late and you missed the bit where I said I went jet skiing this morning. So this is even better than a late night party. I got on the jet ski with the neighbour a couple of doors down, and we ripped out onto the ocean, had a good jet ski, smashed by water. I think I'm going to go out and do it again. It's, what are we today? A couple of weeks into spring, and it's already 22 degrees Celsius. So that's a good note to go out on. So no, this is not the party look. This is the wind-blown jet ski look. All right, thanks all for your input on that. I'm going to keep thinking about it. I feel like the discussion is great. If people have other ideas, like if you listen to this or watch this later on, and have an idea of how to do this that doesn't just overburden me, please leave a comment somewhere. Let me know. I'd love to hear more about it. I have been thinking about this again, honestly, for 6 years. I can go back to my notes, but it is something which I think is more important than ever to have some sort of an index around this. All right, folks, have an awesome weekend, and I'll catch you still from home. My last one before I head back to the US. I'll catch you next week. See ya.